Hello, everyone. Hope everyone had their morning coffee and is ready for this first topic. When I've learned at first that I will kick off this event with the first topic, I thought people will hate me. Like I use outlier for DeFi. It's an event about DeFi, so not very positive. But at the end of the day, I hope that it will be like this espresso in the morning for you, that this presentation will just steer your thoughts and will be the perfect opening. So how can DeFi transform from an outlier to a trusted and responsible player? And the first question is, DeFi is great, right? Otherwise, we wouldn't have an entire day devoted to DeFi today. And I don't need to dive into it in depth. We all know why DeFi is great. It's non-custodial. We have innovation. We don't need to trust someone. We don't need to fear anymore that a malicious player will take our funds because it's all non-custodial. There are no exclusions. We can innovate without the stifling regulations. But let's take the rose-colored glasses off. It's not so perfect. It's been a couple of years, and by now we can realize that DeFi is not growing as fast as we want to, that a lot of people are now pinpointing the fact that maybe DeFi is not meeting its objectives. We mentioned financial inclusion as one of the potentials of DeFi. Well, now we hear about the limits of DeFi in terms of financial inclusion. We hear a lot about lending protocols, what they can unleash in terms of use cases. We have now started showing that lending protocols, 85% of the utilization is mostly for trading. So we're just adding to the financial ecosystem and not really changing the world by financing crops in Africa or allowing people to have easy loans. So now, how come? Why is DeFi an outlier there? So much potential, everyone was enthusiastic. We had all these reports about the potential and opportunities. What is wrong? Well, this. I think an image is better than a lot of words. There's basically no lifeguard on duty once you enter the DeFi space, and it's something we're not so used to. So now let's break it down into something with words, after all. There are three unpopular truths about DeFi. We all want to have freedom. It's the same with social media. We don't want people to censor what we are posting. And in DeFi, it's the same. If I want to transfer funds, I don't want anyone to control who I'm transferring to and just block it. But if there's no safeguard on duty, well, there's also no one to save me if something goes wrong. So you may have this beautiful beach where you can do whatever you want, but when there's an exploit, a major hack, a black swan event, as some of them happened, there's no one to pay me back, no one to save me, no one to take me by the hand. So if there's no middleman, there's no one to help you. But sometimes we'll say, well, actually the middleman is just decentralized. We have this decentralized autonomous organization, a DAO, that can help you. After all, when an exploit occurs, you may have the DAO voting on a compensation plan. Yeah, but it will take a while, and it will happen only afterwards. When a lot of people are in charge without a clear authority, well, actually no one is in charge most of the time at the end. And then, if the middleman is just an autonomous technology, it's basically a self-driving car, well, it means that by using it, we accept that the technology is better, even if it fails, than a human that fails. It seems good on paper, but once you actually interact with it, and let's imagine our funds are drained, it becomes a bit comfortable. Like, who would put 2 million into a protocol that could be drained? Even if everything was done correctly, the risk zero doesn't exist. So there's no perfect solution there. We have something that has all this potential, but also has a lot of downsides. So let's break it down into points. First of all, security, and there'll be other presentations today about the security aspect, but DeFi products are self-driving cars, and everyone is enthusiastic about AI, self-driving, autonomous things. But as I mentioned before, risk zero doesn't exist. So just knowing that there is risk zero and no central entity responsible to put in place some insurance and really manage things is already a major point to be an outlier. I had this very interesting conversation with a friend who told me that they will never use a lending protocol just because why take the risk? I could hodl my funds somewhere on my non-custodial wallet and have like a small percentage that grows over time just because the value increases. why would I put it in a lending protocol where potentially it gets drained for whatever reason? It was quite interesting, this perception of security is still an issue. Complexity as well. When we end up on interfaces for DeFi protocol, it's not always obvious what can be done there. It's products being often built by degens for degens, and we have great products. But it's just like architects bragging about how awesome the construction is from a technical standpoint. Well, people want to know how to use it. I don't want to know how the engine of a car works. I want to drive it. I want to maybe enjoy the design. And we're still at the stage where we hear about ZK proofs. We hear about how awesome everything is, how we can restake things, how the smart contract was improved. Well, I just want to know how I can make money out of it and whether I can take a loan. So complexity is still a major issue. Ambiguous claims as well. Here we go to the core of the problem of why maybe DeFi is an outlier. When I reach out to any service, I know exactly what to expect. I know who produced a specific item. I know how it's going to work. There's like a clear set of guidelines. In DeFi, well, not everything is always on chain. When we have order books, for example, often the matching script is run off-chain. We may have some aspects that are handled in a centralized manner, although it's called decentralized finance, and the information is not always there. So I'm interacting with something, having a label that has a lot of associated connotations. It's supposed to be decentralized, autonomous, and be wonderful. But at the end of the day, sometimes we have, not even sometimes, often, we have a lot of exceptions that are not so clear, which makes it ambiguous. And would you trust something that seems ambiguous? I present myself as decentralized, but then actually not so much, and you only discovered it while using the product. This already creates a feeling of mistrust. And then decentralized governance is often a utopia. This is also maybe an important thing to mention. We mention it as a decentralized finance because the infrastructure is decentralized, and if we have governance, it's decentralized too. But when you check numbers, about 3% of token holders vote. So how decentralized is it? Do we really want to use a product that can be influenced by the community, but only 3% of the community votes? The worst democracy is better than that. And finally, regulations. This is my topic as a lawyer. Often when you hear about regulations and DeFi, it's like, oh, it's not applicable to us. We don't care. We are decentralized, so it doesn't apply to us. And the usual standards and safeguards are not there as a result. There's a lot of things that we are used to in traditional finance with centralized actors that isn't even transposed like on a voluntary basis to DeFi. It's just like, oh, I don't need to look at it because I am decentralized. And all the debates as to whether something is actually DeFi and can really benefit from this exemption of like closing your eyes on regulations don't really create a sustainable environment. And then policies. So it's related to regulations, but let's say it's broader. We are so used to having some sort of consumer protection. And as a policy, it means that it's not necessarily something that is imposed on you by a law, but that should be taken into account. How many DeFi protocols mention consumer protection somehow? How many of them tell you how you're protected? You may have some security claims, but because it's just an infrastructure, and this is how it's delivered to you. This is an infrastructure, use it at your own risk. All of these things that we're used to are not there, which makes it a bit complicated for a lot of people to interact, because if it's complex, if the claims are ambiguous, and on top of that, there's no protection for me, why would I use it actually? And anti-money laundering that we hear a lot, money is being laundered in DeFi. Well, if we check the numbers, this is not the worst thing ever. On the contrary, cash is still the worst place for that. But it's not reassuring. If I use DeFi for something, and then I off-ramp my funds with a bank, and the bank tells me, sorry, you used a DeFi protocol, there were some tainted funds there, no one was in control of it, so you can't use your money. This becomes an issue. So how can we grow DeFi if by interacting with it, potentially we are blocking ourselves in the traditional financial system? So now, is it bad to be an outlier? From what I said before, it sounds that probably it's bad. But why concretely? Because we'll have limited growth. people will not start interacting beyond the people who really believe in DeFi and the potential. They will not reach out for this slightly tricky thing being a toy for traders currently. There's also bad reputation. When you hear about DeFi, like a couple of years ago, approximately 2 years ago, there was an entire series of articles about all the hacks. It was hack season. One protocol after another was hacked. Now you have all these articles about how DeFi is not being regulated and doesn't want to and is pushing back on it just to benefit from any potential exemption. It's not the best thing from a PR perspective for any industry. And finally, unsustainable business practices. I have a great DeFi protocol, but then let's say in 2 years, the SEC in the US or any other authority will tell me that it was not compliant for whatever reason, and everything shuts down. This doesn't really reassure anyone. It doesn't reassure any traditional financial institution willing to interact with me, and it doesn't reassure investors and users ultimately. You don't want to know that your bank will just shut down in 2 years. So now, what to do? Well, first of all, for security, one of the things put forward is always audits. It was audited by I don't know how many security firms, and it's great. But for a user, when you check if it's published, the audit report, well, it's just gibberish. They will not understand that. They will not understand whether all the concerns were actually tackled. They will not know whether the measures that were implemented are good or not. And there will be another presentation about the state of security in DeFi today. But just in general, it's great to know that things are done, but the user doesn't understand it. So would you really want to interact with something that you don't get? I mean, for AI, we can say it's a black box. For DeFi, everything is supposed to be transparent, but if we don't understand it, is it really that transparent? Seeing information that you have no clue how to interpret and how to assess the level of risk and security for whether you want to interact with it or not, this is probably not the way forward. So also, I mentioned compensation, but like possible consequences. Great, we have a lending protocol, for example. This is the best example because a couple of them were hacked. Well, some of these exploits, the failures that were exploited were actually known beforehand. Some of these protocols had mitigation measures. Some of them had potential compensation plans. But most of the time, we learn about it afterwards. It's like, oh, now the community, because something happened, will try to figure out a solution. But do I really want to interact with a product where if something happens, only then people will start to figure out what is the solution? You want to know in advance. I mean, I want to know if there is some sort of insurance, whether I will get compensation, if so, how much of it, because the risk is there. If it's something that was completely unexpected, fair point, let's leave it that way. But otherwise, it doesn't make much sense. Complexity. I said it before, like, why brag about the engine of DeFi? If you look at most of the landing pages of DeFi protocols, you will not see the actual use cases. You will hear claims about the yield, about the tech, about a lot of things, but not what people can actually do with it. So if you're not a trader, you have no clue. Ask your neighbor what they can do with a lending protocol. Beyond the word lending, like, oh, maybe I can get a loan, and then show them the interface. They have no clue what to do with it. So as one article from The Economist I really liked, and it was already published 2 years ago, said it's booming, but it has to find its purpose. What is the purpose of DeFi so far? And we always have this dichotomy between finance and structuring financial products and then real-life economy on the other hand. But in the world we're used to in traditional finance, these two words connect at the end of the day. You can finance, thanks to those products, brilliant companies. In DeFi, we're not there yet. There are some projects that are really interesting that actually make this connection, but there's not enough of them. Now, ambiguous claims, regulations, and policies. We can put all of this into one big pot. And what we need to do is start to cook differently at smart contract level. This is one thing. And also need to serve the dish better in terms of interface level. What does it mean? Well, all these ambiguous claims, all these problems in terms of how consumer protection concerns are not implemented, all of this could be actually taken into account by developers and by teams. Okay, this is the recipe. this is not, this is a heavy slide, but let's take one thing at a time. Let's start with fair market conditions, for example. Currently, if I interact with DeFi, how do I know whether someone is front-running me or not? How do I know whether there is some wash trading and orders that don't actually exist? There's no way to know whether I am trading in a fair environment or someone is trading against me. Well, what about embedding this kind of prevention mechanisms in the code itself? And there are some ways. We have the tech, we have gatekeepers, we have a lot of things that can be simply embedded in the code and say, if you're trading in this infrastructure, the infrastructure itself blocks anything that's not supposed to happen. Same for AML. We have a lot of solutions now, also based on gatekeepers in terms of anti-money laundering. And maybe it's not compliant with the regulations we have in place. Maybe they are not storing all the data with the centralized entity, simply because there's no centralized entity. But there are solutions that, for example, allow you to scan your passport and generate a ZK proof of your jurisdiction so that a protocol can know whether you can provide your funds or not because you are or not in a sanctioned or FATF blacklist jurisdiction. This is so convenient. You know that something is right. You have tools also to assess, for example, what exactly is in a pool. If I supply my funds to a lending pool, for example, if I want to swap them, I want to know that my funds will not be mixed with anything that's tainted. You have now tools that allow you to assess whether 75% of that pool is tainted or just 5% and this kind of thing. So there's a lot of tools that can help you achieve the same objectives as you have in traditional finance, although on different terms. And if we start implementing them, this will be the best way of proving that it works. Maybe it's not compliant with the regulations as they are now, but if proactively they're implemented and we show they work, maybe regulations will follow over time. Same for sound governance, transparency. Transparency is very broad. I mentioned it before in the presentation. We don't have the information. We have a Gitbook. We have all the information regarding the code, but people don't understand the code, and then there's governance on top. How many DAOs publish charters? How many of these DeFi protocols make it clear what people can vote on or not? This is the kind of thing that should become a best practice. I don't want to vote on something and then discover that 2 months later something was decided by a core team without even reaching out to the team. But on the other hand, if there's no list of competences, how am I supposed to know what I am allowed to vote on or not? So sound governance as well. There was a lot of talks about decentralized autonomous organizations. And those DAOs even took over the landscape. It became more important to talk about the governance and community than the actual DeFi infrastructure and the product. It's like, how do we organize voting? How do you bring people on board? How do we reward them to vote more? Well, we see that not everyone votes. And most of us will not vote on 10 different protocols if we use them. Maybe we'll pick one and still we have a life, a job, other things to think about. We will not read through lengthy proposals. So maybe one of the ways to go forward is to forget about this dream of we need a community voting on everything. It's a utopia. It's beautiful. It may work in some cases, but this is not the core aspect of DeFi. This is not the non-custodial, innovative infrastructure. This is just like the cherry on top. If we reach that, great. If not, maybe we could just consider having some DeFi concierge services where professionals, people who actually endorse a role, disclose their identity, their skills, their CV, why they are competent, publish proposals that then people vote on. Because currently, if we look at the landscape, we have proposals submitted by anonymous people, voted on by anonymous people. Great. How do I know whether the person who published the update actually has a clue what's happening there? Whether they know what's the best security practice? I just trust the community and the process. But sometimes trusting is not the best thing if we have no clue who we're trusting for this kind of interesting things. So if you want to see billions more end up in DeFi, probably we need to add a layer of professionalization on how these infrastructures are being handled. It's great to have anonymous or pseudonymous multi-signature wallets actually implementing this, but we want to know what is being implemented. So maybe just a small thought that I came up for this conference. Let's have some DeFi concierge, someone who actually takes care of it, and we know who this person is, why they are skilled. Now, prudential requirements. I just before mentioned multi-signature wallets being entrusted with the protocol. We are used in traditional finance to having those prudential requirements for centralized entities. You need some reserves, you need to prove you have the skills, and so on. In Web3, you would say it's not really relevant because there's no centralized entity. But you have people still involved with these DeFi protocols. As mentioned, there's someone articulating update proposals, someone who is executing them. There are people who are handling the interface. These people may need to prove to a certain extent that they are skilled. And maybe we'll keep on having those DeFi protocols that are just built by degens for degens. But one way of going forward and proving that DeFi can be responsible is maybe taking the most important part of DeFi, the infrastructure, being autonomous, decentralized, and custodial, and adding someone on top who proves that they know what they're doing and how they're handling this infrastructure. Now, a future, the shark, because we often mention DeFi is a world of sharks. Everyone does whatever they want, it's open waters. If I want to hack, exploit, scam someone, it's easy because there's no one controlling it. Well, actually those sharks could be controlled if we just, as mentioned, hard code a lot of standards and policies. Let's be creative and think about how the code can actually replace the middleman. A centralized middleman has standards, provides some guarantees. Let's do the same in DeFi. Not just take the middleman away, but actually replace it by code. And obviously not everything can be hard-coded, but with ZK proofs there's a lot of things that you can do, so let's get creative there. And there'll be other talks probably mentioning ZK proofs, but this is where the potential lays. And then, at the end of the day, it could not only become a trusted player, but potentially a player that's trusted more than centralized finance or traditional finance, because if we actually block all these actions, it's better than what happens in TradFi. In TradFi, we have regulations. They are supposed to deter people from acting badly and stealing your funds and doing whatever with it. The asset manager is not supposed to go against your will and just do whatever with your funds. Great, but if they can still do it, it's not because a regulation says they can't that they will not do it. The only thing that will happen is that they'll get sued and potentially pay damages and give you back whatever they stole from you. Here, with technology, you could end up in an environment where basically you can't even do wrong because the tech does not allow you to proceed. So there'll be no need for centralized actors, and the regulator will sleep better than he ever did because he would just take whatever he wanted to, being those ingredients that are so important, consumer protection and so on, and will just implement it in a way that's even better than whatever he had dreamt of until now. So this is the end. I hope this will inspire some people to think about how DeFi can be even better. I mean, the first question was mostly, is DeFi the best version of itself? I would say it's good, but probably not the best version yet, so let's work on it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anne-Grace. I think we have time for one question, if you'd like to answer. One of our guests is asking, despite the cons of DeFi outweighing the tips to overcome them, what motivates you to stay in the industry?
So there are more cons than pros. Despite the cons of DeFi, the tips of what motivates me is because I've seen all the cons of traditional finance as well. When I started as a lawyer, we were still dealing with the aftermath of the financial crisis. It took years, and a lot of people lost money. So having this possibility of working on an alternative to the current system is what motivates me. You can not only innovate, but actually build something that helps people. When I've put a screenshot from a report on financial inclusion. This is something that is also interesting. Even in the European Union, there's a lot of financial exclusion and people who are unbanked. All of this could be solved with DeFi if we build it in a responsible manner, which is not yet the case yet, but it's always better to be in an industry where you see you can have an impact and somehow stir the way it's being built and influence the future. If everything is already there, you have the regulations, the infrastructures, and like banks that exist for I don't know how many, 20, 25 years, there's not much innovation that can be done there. So I just like to be in the sandbox.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Guys.